Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Tuesday Tea with me, Alisha Bowker Mudrock. Today I have Ashely on. I had the pleasure of being a guest on her podcast not that long ago. I'll make sure to also link the episode here so folks can follow up and listen to that as well. But excited to get to be the interviewee this time and have her on as the guest. I'm going to let her give us like a little introduction on who she is, what she's up to, where she's coming from. But we're really going to dive into more on this topic of love as it is February, but really from the lens of self-love, and thinking through just how we can continue to show up for ourselves in this year of you and find that compassion and grace that I think sometimes is a big sticky point for people. So, welcome, Ashely. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
And let us know a little bit about you, where you're coming from, who you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. So I'm Ashely Comegys. I am a licensed clinical social worker and perinatal health, mental health certified provider. And I wear kind of like two hats in my career. I am a therapist with a private practice, and I specialize in working with women with anxiety, helping them to navigate grief, loss, and life transitions with a specialty in perinatal mental health, and then also working with military spouses.
Mm.
And then the second part of kind of like my career area is I do some coaching and consulting for women and mom therapists who are building or wanting to build private practices. And so I have a lot of support that I provide there as well. So those are kind of like the two kind of career areas. And personal life. My husband's in the Coast Guard, so I fall into that military spouse kind of category. And also I'm the mom of three wild little ones. So I've got a lot on my plate.
Always a busy day at your home.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, and Ashely and I bonded over my husband was also in the Coast Guard. He just recently retired, but just living that life and knowing about all the moves and the
Yep.
politics and all the things.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
it is a whole life.
It is. It is a whole life. Yeah. It's very different. And it adds a whole other component of just
Hmm.
navigating the world for sure.
Yes, yes. But again, thank you for your family service. Very much appreciated. So when we think of this topic of self-love and maybe even more that subtopic of self-compassion, like what sort of comes to mind? Where can we kind of start this conversation just from your lens and the things that you
Yeah.
see and work with?
You know, in my private practice, I feel like this is such a common topic that I explore with clients. Like I said, my specialty is really working with women, especially women with anxiety. And I find so many women really struggle with self-compassion, but really a lot of it is kind of rooted in this place of like perfectionism.
Mhm.
And I may at times reference The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown because I use that in my work a lot around self-compassion and
Mm.
around this idea of perfectionism and kind of self-worth. But I think a lot of times I don't know where it comes from. I don't know if it's from the magazines we've read growing up, the things we
Mm.
see on social media. I do think it's the things we see on social media, but then the things I think our family and our friends and people in our community have absorbed, so society,
Yeah.
that we start holding ourselves as women to this standard of what we think we're supposed to be and living up to whatever this image or standard that somebody else has arbitrarily set, or that we at least have perceived that they have set, right? They
Yeah.
may not actually have, but we've just like taken this
Internalize that.
bombardment of stuff, yeah, and like created in our head.
Hmm.
And I think we then have this standard with which we're judging ourselves.
Mm.
And the reality is, most of the time, we're not going to actually hit that standard because it's somebody else's life.
Right.
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 And so then we are existing in this place of not being happy with ourselves or feeling like, oh, I use the shoulds and coulds a lot, and we'll probably get into that a
Mm.
little bit with this, but
Hmm.
that like there's so much of I should be doing this or I shouldn't be doing that, or I can't believe I did this, like really judgmental towards
Mm.
ourselves. And we're judging ourselves from this place of, I don't know that it's anybody is saying I have to be perfect, but it's this judging ourselves from this idea of what a successful woman looks like, or a good mom looks like,
Yeah.
or a healthy person is, right? That we're judging ourselves from that, like whatever that standard may be.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we find that we're not hitting that mark, it goes into that place of guilt, judgment, shaming
Mm.
ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where then, especially in my work with clients, is how do we flip that?
Mm-hmm.
How do we instead come to a place of self-compassion with ourselves versus operating from this place of judging and shaming ourselves?
How would you say someone could identify that they are operating from that place? Because I think some folks have that awareness, but I
Yeah.
think sometimes it's so subtle that if you just straight up asked a group of 20 women, I don't know if all of them would be like, oh yeah, I definitely do that. Right.
Yeah.
Or would see it as such. So maybe what are some of like the signs or symptoms, for lack of a clinical
Yeah.
word, like
Yeah.
that people present with?
Well, and this isn't even like a clinical thing, right? Like it
Right,
can
right. I
be,
was just
right?
like
But
symptoms
but
so
like,
clinical.
yeah, but if you're wanting to like be like, okay, what are the things to kind of look for? I mean, I reference the shoulds, and
Mhm.
I a lot of times I'll talk with clients about, I'll say like you're shoulding yourself, right?
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is when we notice that we're using should or shouldn't in reference to ourselves, what we're doing is we're putting ourselves with limitations, right? That
Mm.
the idea of that, like if you say like you should eat, you know, five, fruits and vegetables a day, you should eat that. You shouldn't eat candy. You shouldn't have
Mhm.
sugar. You shouldn't do
Mhm.
XYZ. What it's doing is putting things in a very kind of, like I said, boxed in kind of idea. And
Yes.
so if we should do that, that's quote unquote right. But if we shouldn't do that, then it's wrong. And
Mhm.
so often I will, be working with a client and I'll just notice how much those shoulds are coming up, or I shouldn't have done that.
Mm.
And a lot of times it's in reference, not even to necessarily like present day things, but
In the
like
past.
in the past. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so it's like, I should have known better. I should have known it was
Mhm.
going to turn out that way, or I shouldn't have made that decision. And so
Mm.
again, it's coming from that place of we're looking at ourselves in the past, or maybe it is something that happened yesterday,
Yeah.
and we're viewing it through this lens of that because I did that and I shouldn't have done that, or I should have done that, that somehow what I did was wrong. And
Hmm.
that's coming from that place of judging self. And so, where
Mhm.
we can flip that, and what I encourage clients to do is, okay, what if we change should to could, right? So, where we're saying, like, you know, I should have known that if I got into that relationship, it was going to end poorly, right? I just
Right.
should have known. Like, there were
Right.
red flags there. I should have known. But if we put could in there, right? Like I could have looked at those red flags, right? Like I
Mhm.
could have seen those things,
Mhm.
and I, could have found a different explanation than I already did find, right? Like I had an
Mhm.
explanation of why I was going to continue that relationship. I could have, said I'm going to, not go down that path or not choose that career, but that doesn't mean that I would have been happy in it.
Hmm.
Right. And so could just opens it up for more possibilities, right?
Mhm.
Where there's this, I with should is this very limited mindset that something did not go the way it was supposed to, or it did
Right.
go the way a certain way and it was not the right thing. And so
Right.
it's wrong versus could. I always kind of like visualize it as like more open-handedness, right? Where like I'm holding space for multiple possibilities that it could have turned out a different way. And so if I'm using that language in reference to myself, it's a little bit gentler, right?
Mhm.
Like it's not coming from this place of I've made a wrong choice, or I'm not
Right.
doing something the right way. It's just a more
Right.
gentler like mindset and kind of approach.
And I think it really frees up the belief that there are so many right and wrong, black and whites
Yes.
in the world,
Yeah.
right? There are a few things,
Sure.
sure, that like fit into the shoulds and the right and
Yes.
wrong, but I think it also just creates this new freedom that there's a lot more gray than we like to live
Yeah.
with. And I'm imagining too, though, folks who tend to trend into that more perfectionist category, type A, that's a really hard place to live. So it's
Yeah.
somehow easier to think, well, it's my fault. I should have done this. I can prevent it in the future and I
Yeah.
will get the right grade next time. Then sometimes shit happens and sometimes there's
Right.
lots of options and sometimes it's not just like one thing is right or wrong.
Right.
And so it's almost this weird like coping, right? That
Yeah.
feels really bad, but it's trying to like soothe this other piece of like lack of control or uncertainty that
Yeah.
can get brought up when we don't see stuff so just like it's one or the other.
Right. Well, and I think the other part with that too is that, again, like a lot of times we're judging ourselves for things that are in the past. Well, I mean, if
Hmm.
we're judging ourselves, it's for usually something that has already happened, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And a lot of times it's things that, it maybe was a year ago or even 6 months ago, and sometimes it's like years ago, decades ago.
Yeah.
And I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for the journey we have been on since then or how we have
Yeah.
grown and changed.
Yeah.
And that, yes, sitting here today, you may look back and be like, wow, I cannot believe I made that decision, right? Like, that's wild. Why would I have made that?
Right.
And so then we judge that version of ourselves from
Right.
them. Right. And so we're judging and shaming her and, being like, I can't
Mm.
believe you did that.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
but the things that we know about life today in the present moment are not the things that we
So
knew about life
different.
yesterday, right? And are
Exactly.
certainly not those things that we knew about life, you know,
At
a year
21,
ago. Yeah,
18,
exactly,
7.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not necessarily to bring this into this, but I think about you hear this a lot of times with survivors of sexual
Hmm.
assault, right?
Hmm.
That there's this blame, I should have known better. I shouldn't have
Yep.
gone
I
there,
shouldn't
right?
have worn that short skirt. I
Yes,
shouldn't have taken that cab
yes.
ride home, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, and just really shaming and judging ourself or themselves for having something happen to them that was not their fault
Mm-mm.
and but really blaming. And again,
Hmm.
it's internalization of external things, that's
Yeah.
part of it, but also that the wisdom that we have now in our present is not necessarily experience or the wisdom that we had then, and that doesn't mean that again that we made a decision that we it is our fault that this happened,
Mm-mm.
but that you know no, maybe at this age in our 30s we would not have made that choice to go
Hmm.
there, but that also is
Hmm.
not something we're going to judge that former version
Hmm.
of ourselves for doing.
Hmm.
um I always think about, would I like, if that version that I'm shaming or judging myself, if that was a friend, right? Like, would I tell her those things? Would I be like,
Hmm.
you are stupid for doing that? How could you have done that? Why
Hmm.
would you, you know better? Or,
Yeah.
like, why would you let yourself, get in that kind of relationship? Or why would you think it would turn out any different? I would never say those to a
Right.
friend.
Right.
Never, right?
Right.
Like, I would be offering her that compassion.
Hmm.
And so it's so hard to do that for ourselves because again, I think we're just like primed a lot of times as women to be very critical of ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, but we really need to work, like find ways to offer that self-compassion. Because all we're doing then is just shaming ourselves. And it's not gonna make us better. Like it's
No.
not gonna improve
No.
something.
No. And it almost strips away our power, right?
Yeah.
To stay stuck and in this guilt spiral or shame spiral or self-deprecation spiral. We're not growing. We're not
Yeah.
feeling connected to ourselves. We're not feeling fulfilled. We're not feeling empowered. And
Yeah.
so we're actually perpetually hurting ourselves
Yeah.
more instead of being able to find ways to, like you said, connect with all the parts of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
In every moment of life, we're doing the best we can with the information and the situation that's going on at that time. And hindsight is 2020 is a very popular phrase for a
Right.
reason.
Right.
So I think it and objectivity changes everything. But we can't be objective with ourselves in a very
Yeah.
emotion fueled situation, which is often the ones in which we so often go back to the shoulds and the judgment,
Yeah.
right? And so I think, like you said, perhaps just starting to like listen for when you do use the word should at like a
Yeah.
curious moment first,
Yeah.
and just start to navigate how often and when and in what areas.
Yeah.
And then the more awareness, the more we can put these tools, like you're saying, in changing that to could, or
Right.
being objective now because we are out of that and we can see
Right.
it differently, or offering grace to that version of ourselves in that moment
Yeah.
and understanding better why she did or didn't or whatever
Right.
happened, right?
Right, right. No, I think like being able to, like, if you're saying, like, I know this is going on, I don't know what to do with it. I think the first place is to notice where it is coming up, exactly like you're saying. Like,
Mm-hmm.
not saying to, like, you need to just all of a sudden make this change, but
Yeah.
notice how often, whether it's you're saying it to yourself or you're saying it to other people, shoulds are coming in.
Yeah.
If and you, I think you would be more surprised of just how much you're doing it.
Yeah.
Like when I meet with a client for the first time and I'm just hearing I should have done this or I shouldn't have done that or I should, I'm like, okay, there is a
Slow
lot of
down here.
there's a lot of self-shaming going on here, a
Yeah.
lot of self-judgment, a lot of self-criticism. And so
Yeah.
just being able to notice that, you know, so many people when I kind of bring it up, it's like, I just want you to notice this week. And they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much I'm doing it. And so
Yeah.
just bringing that awareness, right? That like, okay, I'm really judging myself here. I'm really shaming myself. Now what do I do with that, right? That
Mm-hmm.
like what if that thing, right? I just had that thought or I had that thought yesterday of should. So what if I think of the could? What are the
Mm-hmm.
other scenarios here?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not necessarily like actively doing things, but it's just bringing that like mindfulness and awareness
Yep.
to those moments because then that helps you to see like what's like what's something that needs to be addressed here. What's
Yeah.
something that can be worked on.
Yeah. I think another piece that I hear a lot too from clients that sometimes like the guilt that pops up around things that are so wildly out of someone's control. So
Yes.
some stuff, yes, it is like my actions, my choices, my thing that I did have power over. But I think another layer to that could be also noticing when you're feeling guilt or responsibility or apologizing for things that just have nothing to do with anything that
Yeah.
you could have had any power over. And
Right.
like let's take a pause and wonder, like, do these even all go together? Right?
Right, right. Well, and I also think too with that, like there is this like again, blaming self for things that are outside of our control. And then with that, like almost again shaming and judging self as if it was like on purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and that like I can't believe, that I did that at that point in time, or I can't believe I said that to those people. Like, I just I just did such a bad thing or made such a bad choice.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I think is so important to remind ourselves of is that the majority of us are not actively going out and saying, this is a bad choice and I'm going to do it on purpose. Right?
Right.
Like the
Right.
majority of us are saying, I think this is the best choice in this moment, and I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
go with it. And we
Mm-hmm.
cannot fortune tell what's going to happen with it. And
Right.
so when we're finding those places again that we're judging and shaming ourselves again for something that maybe we had some choice in, maybe we didn't,
Mm-hmm.
but to recognize that like I was doing the very best that I could at that given moment.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that again that you need to beat yourself up about it. Doesn't
Right.
mean you're bad, right? It's just you were doing the best you could then, and we do
Mm-hmm.
not give ourselves enough credit for that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, navigate, like sometimes it's just I didn't navigate that situation well, it's my fault. And it's again, no, that was a really hard situation and you did the best you could
Yeah.
with what you were working with at that time.
Yeah. And maybe in like a moving forward from that too, right? Information is power. So now though, going forward, I have new information and I
Yeah.
potentially could make different choices
Yeah.
with the framework I now have for certain things, or I could handle stuff
Sure.
perhaps differently because I've learned something and I've been through something.
Yeah.
Um, and I think using this stuff instead of getting stuck in using it as like I imagine like whipping yourself, beating yourself
Yes.
up, let's use it as something to propel us forward in a positive way.
Yeah.
Okay, that wasn't the best. That
Yeah.
ended poorly. that totally went to shit. That was
Yeah.
whatever.
Right,
And
right.
what though, there's so much life ahead of us.
Yes.
So how can I take this information and utilize it as something powerful to help
Right.
me in the future instead of a thing that's weighing me down or holding me back or like the scarlet letter on my chest that
Yeah.
no one's put there but myself, you know?
Right. I mean, like what is it actually benefiting us to continue to carry that like
Mm-hmm.
into the future and like you said, like beating ourselves up, right? Like if we're not able to bring compassion to ourselves for that situation, we may be like, yeah, I'm moving forward, but like I have to punish myself for this. But for
Right.
what reason, right? You know,
Right.
like shaming a child into like doing something is not going to like help them to be like, oh yeah, that maybe I should make a different decision, right? Like it's
Right.
not going to build them up. It's not going to help them to, make better choices in the future. And the same is for us, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
shaming ourselves, judging ourselves for something that whether maybe we didn't have control of a situation or maybe we did, but
Mm-hmm.
again, we made a choice that like we thought was the best choice at the time. And in hindsight, that was not the best choice.
Yep.
But it's not like we did this on purpose to sabotage. It's not like,
Right.
we would make
Right.
it again. And so where can we learn and grow from that rather than beat ourselves up, you know, in some ways isolate this part of ourself,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus like coming at it from this place of like, I see you, it's okay. Like, yeah, that wasn't best. It was a mistake, but it's okay, right?
Yeah.
Versus like
Yeah.
kind of cutting it off and just kind of shaming that part.
Yeah. And this makes me think about moving into that space of believing that we're worth that type of
Yeah.
compassion and worth being shown grace,
Yeah.
that we're worth having goals and dreams and succeeding. So maybe could you speak a little bit to what would you recommend or some tools folks can use to kind of lean into, connecting with their worth, connecting with grace, connecting with just love for themselves
Yeah.
to take all this and then move forward, in a
Sure.
healthy way.
So if it's okay with you, I want to just like read
Yeah,
this one section because I had of
please.
the gifts of imperfection because it goes exactly to this.
Perfect.
Um and so it goes to this part about like right being able to have this compassion towards ourselves really is built on the sense that we believe we are worthy of that compassion, right?
Hmm.
And so this is from Brene Brown's book Gifts of Imperfection. It says if we want to fully experience love and belonging, we must believe that we are worthy of love and belonging. When we
Hmm.
let go of what other people think and own our story, we gain access to our worthiness, the feeling that we are enough just as we are and that we are worthy of love and belonging. When we spend a lifetime to distance ourselves from the parts of our lives that don't fit with who we think we're supposed to be, we stand outside of our story and we hustle for our worthiness by constantly performing, perfecting, pleasing, and proving. And
Hmm.
I love that because, this idea of perfectionism, um, when you break it down, and I think it's one of those things like the light bulb goes off, like perfectionism really isn't about ourself, but it's about trying to prove our worthiness
Yep.
and getting that approval from somebody else,
Yep.
right? But that the reality is, in order for us to be able to love others and to see them of having worth, we have to see that worth within ourselves first,
Exactly.
right? And
Hmm.
so being able to have some of that grace, being able
Hmm.
to have that compassion to say, like, it's okay whatever has happened in my past. Like it is okay that I have made mistakes. It is okay that I don't look like whatever the Instagram, gods are
Hmm.
telling me I'm supposed to
Hmm.
look like and follow and do
Yeah.
and be, right?
Yeah.
That it is okay that I am just me and that this is my story, right? That
Mm.
what is working for you and working for that person down the street and working for that person on TikTok is not going to work for me,
Yeah.
and that it doesn't have to be that I'm striving for this perfectionism that is not attainable because it's not my story, it's not my life.
Mm.
And so
Hmm.
being able to recognize that like I am enough as I am, and I know that's hard, right? Like that is so hard
Yes.
because we are told we
Yes.
have to measure up to all this stuff,
Yeah.
but being able to recognize that okay, maybe the way to begin starting to practice some of this self-compassion is I need to start working on believing that I am worthy of it and
Mm-hmm.
coming from that place of like, I deserve to be loved. I deserve to feel loved by myself. And I
Yep.
think part of that, and her book goes more into it too, is being able to recognize where is this authentic piece of myself? Where am I living in this authenticity of this is who I am? I'm not living a version of myself of what somebody else is telling me I'm supposed to be. When I'm living in that place of alignment, when I'm living in that place of authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
there can be satisfaction in that. There can be empowerment in that. There can be fulfillment in that. And
Yes.
that is the place I think we start to believe and find more of that worthiness because we're just connecting with who we are and
Mm-hmm.
not what we're trying to like attain that's not attainable.
Yes. No, I 100%. A few other books coming to mind on this topic. If folks are interested, On Our Best Behavior by Elise Lonan, talking about the seven deadly sins, how they were created to really keep women in line, regardless if you're religious or not. And it's fascinating, but talks even further to some of these points. The Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control by Catherine Morgan Schaffler, obsessed, read it twice. She talks about the seven types of perfectionism and where that stems from. Again, goes back
Yeah.
to worth, but like how they manifest and how to embrace it instead of trying to be something we have to get rid of or apologize
Yeah.
for. Um, and Worthy by Jamie Kern Lima. Also, she gets really to the heart of like if you want to dive more into what is self-worth versus esteem. And
Yeah.
there's definitely like a very large religious slant on that book that I don't think is marketed well. So I'll just throw it out there. But
Okay.
but just, not necessarily bad or good, but just FYI, because
Yeah.
it feels like it's hidden and then like pops up. But all really great on just fleshing out if anyone is interested, because we could probably talk about this for years,
For
right? But
sure.
just
For sure.
even deeper into these really nuanced topics, but all from lens of really incredible women authors from the
Yeah.
vantage point of growing up as and being raised as a female and like what extra
Yeah.
layers that also puts on. Like not that men don't experience this as well, but I think there is a very
There's a
specific
difference.
lens of conversation for women.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
no.
Absolutely.
So what might be something that we'd want to like leave folks with, like a last nugget of wisdom or a summary or to
Yeah,
wrap
I
it all
mean,
up?
if you are internally talking to yourself in a way that you would never talk to a friend, it's just something to notice. And it's not something to shame
Yeah.
yourself over and judge yourself for, but it's something to bring just awareness to. And maybe it's one of those things to say, okay, maybe this is something I want to address this year, right?
Mm-hmm.
That this is something that I want to work on being able to love myself so that I can love my friends more, love my spouse or my partner or my kids more, my family, right? That like finding bringing just awareness, I think is honestly one of the biggest steps to this.
Yeah.
Where we may be like I have good self-esteem, I feel confident, but do we really love ourselves? And are we
Mm,
treating ourselves with the compassion that we probably frequently extend to others, but we're not
mm-hmm.
giving ourselves? So, noticing, bringing awareness to those shoulds, bringing awareness to how we're talking to ourselves, I think it's just a really good place to start. And hey, if you're noticing, hey, I'm not shutting myself, I'm using coulds, I'm, giving myself grace, like that is amazing. And that is something to be proud of because that is not
Yes.
something that is easy. It
No.
takes work. It's
Mm-hmm.
undoing all of the narratives that we grow up with as women that surround us, in our culture. And so if you are, actively working on that, that's amazing. And if it's something that you're noticing more within yourself, like don't be afraid to say, hey, like I'm needing support around this, or I
Yeah.
need to, I want to just work on this for myself because it's going to sound like trite, but like life is too short to be like so miserable with ourselves.
Yes.
There's a lot
Yes.
of beauty in life, as hard as it is, and as, confusing and ugly as it can be. Like, we don't need to be one of those things that is, is coming from a place of hurt and pain, but rather a place of that self-love, that self-compassion, and then that allows us to be able to extend it to other people as well.
100%. Very well said. I do think the more we can open up that freedom within ourselves, the richer our relationships get. And not just for us, but for the other people in our life
Yeah.
that we usually are doing everything for. So
Yeah.
it's a there's only benefits, very few downfalls. Well, thank you so much for your time here. I would love to leave a little room though if there's any offers, things, places people could connect
Yeah.
with you, anything you kind of want to share on that front.
Yeah, so people can connect with me either on Instagram. I'm at Raise to Empower over there. And people can also find me. My podcast is called Raise to Empower. It's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And part of like what we were talking about today is kind of like the basis of the show where there's so much in this world that makes things harder for us just as women in general.
Mhm.
And so the show is tailored for mental health providers and helping women and moms kind of break free of like oppressive systems, even those that are within ourselves, to feel confident in building practices, private practices. But there oftentimes our guests, I mean, our conversation that we had on there, like
Mhm.
it's not just for clinicians.
For anyone.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that come on that show that yes are practice building but that also are around mindset or even money relationship that like I love talking about the
Mhm.
differences of like how women and men approach money and especially in
Yeah.
business and like
Yeah.
again the narratives we tell ourselves and all of that. So check out the podcast that's on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and then over on Instagram. Those are the two places to probably connect with me most.
Awesome. And I'll make sure those links are both in this YouTube notes and in your newsletter. So feel free to use those. Reach out to Ashely, check out her episodes. They're really great as well. And have a wonderful rest of your week. And I'll see you guys later.